Hello and welcome to Power to the People with me, Graeme Pryce. Lest we forget, when Rudyard Kipling wrote that line in a poem in 1897, he could have no idea of the gravity his words would go on to hold across the world, could he? 21 years after the end of the First World War, the Great War to end all wars ended. A bigger and more arguably destructive conflict began. I often think the First World War was a more naive and reactionary war. The donkeys may have led millions to the slaughter, but they did so with more clear and honourable aims than the monsters who started the second conflict. Lest we forget, well, the very few veterans and Holocaust victims that are still with us certainly haven't forgotten. And the Second World War and the Holocaust are the most documented and written about periods of human history. So the historians, professional and amateur like myself, we certainly haven't forgotten. It would seem a lot of people have though, because the fetid phantom of fascism is back. People use words like communism or fascism or Marxism all the time these days. People who don't really know what those words mean. I do though, so I'm going to answer the question, what is fascism? As far as I see it anyway, right after this. I was just looking at my channel analytics and I was shocked to discover that almost 40% of people who watch my videos aren't subscribed. I was inconsolable. You can go some way towards redressing the balance by just checking that you've subscribed, that you've rang the bell, and that you're hitting the like button before you go. It'll go just some way towards making this skinny old scouser a little bit more cheerful today. Thank you. Let's just start with a little example and see how familiar it sounds. The followers of the Führer with the fairy top lip may be long in their graves, and we laugh at the absurdity of their 1,000-year life, and rightly so. They were pompous knobheads who thought they were better than everybody else and had offensively stupid and far-right views that they disseminated through disinformation and propaganda. They steadfastly believed that their dear leader was without blame, without fault and without failure. Sounds familiar, that, doesn't it? Mussolini, Franco, the Führer, the Juice. Now we've got the Don. All of those creatures had one thing in common. They ruled autocratically without consensus, even when they were clearly making stupid decisions. Here's an example. In early 1945, when hundreds of Allied bombers were dropping thousands of bombs on Germany day and night, Albert Speer, Hitler's head architect, approached him in his bunker and pleaded with him to find the workforce and the materials, like concrete, steel, rubber and rebar and stuff, to strengthen German fortifications along the borders of Germany and around cities where they could. Hitler refused. Yes, a few hundred miles away in Poland, a vast workforce of slave labourers were busy building one of Hitler's daydreams. A vast complex under a mountain consisting of 7 huge installments and 100,000 metres of tunnels and rooms, all of which were abandoned, unfinished and useless in May of 1945. Thousands of slave labourers died digging those tunnels. Many thousands more died though when the tanks got to Germany and there were no concrete walls for Fraulein Rammstein to hide behind from the Red Army. Hitler's incredible narcissism and selfishness directly led to the deaths of the very people he had told that he would raise from suffrage. And this wasn't just seen in hindsight either. Speer and the people around him knew that when Hitler refused to redirect resources from building his secret supervillain lair in Poland, his decision would leave millions of Germans with a lesser chance of surviving the war. They knew that when the Russian armoured divisions and infantry reached those people, hiding in cellars or waving a white flag out of the kitchen window, that wasn't going to be anywhere near enough. That's one of the main tenets of fascism, an unending and unshakable belief that the leader is right and perfect and couldn't possibly be a thick, failed painter from Austria who had the world's biggest superiority complex and was still butthurt about the results of the First World War. It couldn't possibly be a misogynistic, dishonest, convicted felon that incited the worst American insurrection in history and who has spent his life ogling underage girls and ripping off anybody who had the misfortune to deal with him either, right? The leader, the Führer, the Don. Everybody else is always lying. Everybody else is always wrong. Everybody else just doesn't understand how he's going to make everything great again and how he just speaks his mind. The only kind of people that demand that kind of unconditional adulation and can rely on their followers believing every word they say, regardless of how ridiculous, are fascists or people that admire fascists. And when the people are enthralled and longing for direction, you give them something to rally against, something else or someone else to blame for all their problems. It was Jewish people in the 1930s and 40s. It was black people in the 50s and the 60s, and it was gay people in the 80s. Now, apparently it's trans people, along with anyone who dares to show empathy, the woke. You try asking a MAGA idiot or one of Farage's fuckwits to tell you what woke means, and you'll see the absurdity of their answers for yourself. They don't know, or they know what they think woke means, but it's a personal interpretation that differs from one right-wing chuff nugget to another. The concept of wokeness is a malleable tool that they can fashion to fit whatever prejudice they're projecting that day. But there are a few signs of fascism that are common and fundamental. It isn't just about feelings or intuition, and it certainly isn't about political affiliation. If I supported a government that started to behave in some sort of fascistic manner, then I would immediately withdraw my support from them. Apparently, it's just a massive coincidence that fascist governments always seem to spring up from far-right parties, though. Obviously, just a coincidence. So, what I did was, I went and looked at about 10 different lists and articles that were definitions of what fascism is, and I collated a list of the things that appeared on basically every list until I had 10 of them. Let's have a quick run through the first ones and see which of them sound familiar. The first one is powerful and continuing nationalism. Well, we've got that one going on, haven't we? Make America great again. We need our sovereignty back. We've got disdain for human rights. Well, all I can say here is that I've never seen a Tory MP's voting record where he or she didn't vote against furthering human rights when given the chance. Not one. The next one, number 3, is identification of enemies as a unifying cause. This is called othering, isn't it? Trump is bringing something new and even more frightening and insidious, though, because he is succeeding in making the whole of the Democratic Party into the others and pretty much anybody that votes for them. The Tories and Reform would like to follow suit. Number 4 is misogynistic white men in positions of power. It's just one thing to say there, really, isn't it? Grab 'em by the pussy. When you're a star, they let you do it. I'm telling you, everybody's talking about it. Who said that? Number 5, obviously. Control of mass media sources. Fox News, Sky News, GBBs, the Daily Mail, the Telegraph, Laura fucking Kunsberg on a Sunday morning. There's a lot more, isn't there? That one's happened, hasn't it? And number 6 is religion and government intertwined. As this has gone separate ways on both sides of the pond, this. But I literally watched a MAGA lunatic say they believe Trump is Jesus reincarnated a few days ago. Now, I'm not saying they're all like that, but Trump himself, during his inauguration speech, if I remember correctly, said that his assassination attempt was God saving him for a greater purpose. There are actually millions of Americans, millions, that believe Trump is divine. We don't have the same use of religion in the UK, but religion here is still intertwined with the far right, isn't it? But here they use it as a weapon instead. What was it Lee Anderson said? They don't control all of London, but they control Cannes, and they've got Starmer. In a sane and sensible nation, he'd have been sacked for saying that. Instead, Rishi's some twat made him deputy chairman. So there you go, there's a few that apply on both sides of the pond, or are slightly different but still apply on both sides of the pond. And they come up on every list of definitions. Got a bit more to say about some of the next ones though. One in particular. So, the one that's very obvious and blatant in the UK, I'm sure you were waiting for me to say it, is obsession with immigration. I mean, I barely need to say anything about that one, do I? Take note though, Labour have so far had much more success with returning illegal migrants and managing asylum claims than the Tories ever did, especially in the last few years. But Nigel and Kemi, they don't want to acknowledge that, and I haven't seen a single news report about it on any mainstream media. The figures don't lie though, and they're compiled by the same people as they were when the Tories were in office. The figures say Labour are doing a better job than the Tories ever did. Then there's disdain for intellectuals and art. Well, you only have to look at the people he's appointing to see that Trump has disdain for the intellectual, don't you? In the UK, Kemi Badenoch recently tried to suggest that sandwiches and getting enough sleep are woke. If that's what they're prepared to say in the House of Commons, imagine what they're saying about male ballerinas or kids from Scunthorpe called Keegan who want to learn to play the harp and things like that. It would be nice. Not only did Brexit make life much harder for artists wanting to tour in Europe, but the Conservatives steadily and continuously reduced funding for every aspect of art and culture during their time in office. Nadine fucking Dorries was the culture minister at one point. Do you think Nadine Dorries takes the rich history and culture of the UK very seriously? Because I fucking don't. I reckon she's too pissed most of the time. Or she was back then. Probably more pissed now, isn't she? This one gets me. Obsession with crime and punishment. Trump claims he's going to deport tens of millions of people. He spent his whole campaign insisting that every single immigrant is either a lunatic, a murderer, or a paedophile, or all three. Farage would like to say similar things, but he knows he wouldn't get away with them. But what he does say is that the UK is drowning in a sea of violent crime. Again, the figures prove that he's wrong. Knife crime has certainly gone up, of course it has, but violent crime in general has actually fallen in the last few years. Even when the Tories were in office, unbelievably. But speaking of knife crime, Reform UK wasted no time in using the strength of feeling about the Southport killings to ride a wave of support for the idea of bringing back capital punishment, didn't they? In fact, let's go back a bit further than that, and let's not forget why we call them the Farage riots, eh? Let's just call a spade a spade. In July of 2024, a far-right social agitator with a long history of dishonesty deliberately incited violent riots on the streets in order to cause civil unrest as a method to express nothing more than sheer racism and rage. Rage that he and his party had inspired with years of racist rhetoric, followed by a campaign of sheer misinformation, disinformation and outright bullshit that had convinced several million of the most uneducated and politically unaware people in the country that they had every right to be furious and that democracy had failed them if they woke up the day after the election and Nigel wasn't Prime Minister. He used that rage and that misinformed anger to take advantage of the murder of 3 innocent children for no other reason than to promote himself and to try and smear the incoming government and Keir Starmer. If you don't think that that's the actions of a narcissistic fascist, then I can't fucking help you, because you're not living in a normal reality with a functioning sense of critical reasoning. And of course, Farage and his ghoulish goons tried to do it all again when we were all talking about the sentencing, didn't they? And get all the dumbos to hate Starmer because he won't let them lynch the murderer. And Trump obviously wants to increase the amount of crimes that are punishable by death in America and reform it in favour of that. Of course they fucking are. Let's move on. We'll finish with this one. Rampant cronyism and corruption. Again, I barely need to say anything there, do I? If you have any suspicion that there isn't rampant cronyism and corruption going on in both the UK and America, I'd suggest you take a look at the differences between the amount of money that all of the world's multi-millionaires and billionaires had, or all of the Tory MPs had, before the pandemic, and the vast wealth that they sit on now, like fat fucking dragons on top of a big pile of gold. Then tell me there's no corruption. There are a few dictators in the world, and there probably always will be. A country having a dictator in charge doesn't necessarily qualify them as a fascist nation, but it usually fulfills most, if not all, conditions on that list. We've got Lukashenko in Belarus, or Putin in Russia, the little fat bloke with the shit hair in North Korea. Have you ever noticed every word of the official name of North Korea is a lie? The Democratic People's Republic of Korea. The DPRK. Well, it's not democratic, obviously. Very little of it belongs to the people. It's not a republic, it's a dictatorship. And it's actually only half of Korea, not all of it. Democratic People's Republic of Korea, my arse. The most obvious fascist that we should be worrying about now, though, is Trump, though, isn't it? The Mango Mussolini himself. The orange orator of bullshit. The propagator of propaganda. The man who convinced 70 million people that it isn't ridiculous to say that in Ohio people are having their cats and dogs eaten by evil Venezuelan immigrants, and he's going to send them all back to Hawaii. And then, of course, there's Musk, who openly did not 1 but 2 Hitler salutes on Trump's inauguration day. The same people, as always, rushed to say he wasn't really doing a Hitler salute. He was throwing his heart out to the people. No, he fucking wasn't. Do you know how we know he wasn't throwing his heart out to the people? Well, it's not just because he probably doesn't have one, but it's also because he hasn't denied it. Not really. In fact, he's made anti-Semitic jokes on Twitter since. And, you know, he's made little jibes about being tired of being compared to Hitler. But even more serious, do you know who really did believe that Elon Musk was doing a Nazi salute? All the Nazis in various countries around the world. They took to social media that day to rejoice at the return of fascism. And Elon Musk didn't ban them from Twitter, didn't block them. He promoted them. Didn't disassociate with them. He let them carry on with their excitement. And then we have our own homegrown but maybe somewhat lesser examples. Of course, Tommy Robinson springs to mind, but I don't think he actually is a fascist. I think he's just a grifter that's prepared to look the other way. Nigel Farage is a much better example and a more worrying one, because his following seems to be growing and he ticks all the boxes for being a full-on fucking fash lad, doesn't he? There are others as well. Suella Braverman used exactly the same trick as Trump did in some of his campaign speeches, and she described illegal immigrants in the same way that Hitler did. She called them an invasion of vermin. Hitler said literally the exact same words, just swap illegal immigrants with the Jewish race, and it was almost word for word the same speech. She couldn't have done that by accident. I think that suggests she's read Hitler's speeches. What does that say about her intentions? And when confronted by one of the few remaining survivors of the Holocaust and asked to retract their words, she refused. She said she wasn't wrong and that she wouldn't apologise. She then twisted the whole situation into a further excuse to spew more hatred and sow more division. Fascists never apologise. Thankfully, Braverman seems to have become a figure of irrelevance of late since losing her bid to become leader of the Conservative Party. But she's in a safe seat and she hasn't gone away. And she made a speech the other day that would sound very familiar to a 10-year-old Jewish boy starving to death in the streets of the Warsaw Ghetto in 1942. I can't bear to look at Twitter anymore, so I don't know for sure. But I guess Elon Musk praised her words, the words of a blatant fascist. Well, if he knows of it at all, that is. But like I say, she's in a safe seat. She'll be back. Like an unflushable turd. Apparently the whole concept of fascism is like an unflushable turd. It just keeps bobbing its little shitty, ugly head back up, doesn't it? Over and over and over again. Thank you for watching if you've gotten this far. What is fascism is a difficult question to answer really, because each country and each dictator is so different. It's not necessarily a nebulous answer though. There are common denominators, as we've seen. I said for many years that the Tories were fascist light, and a lot of people dismissed me or even laughed. The amount of Conservative MPs that are openly backing Trump, despite it being pretty clear that he is a burgeoning fascist dictator, suggests I might have been right all along though, doesn't it? For once, I take no pleasure in saying I told you so. As Trump eventually drags America into the gutter and starts killing people under his MAGA banner, you know, people like Nigel Farage will be there claiming it's the people that oppose Trump that are dragging the US down. And Suella Braverman will be on GBBs saying, those people probably would have died anyway and there's nothing to be concerned about. And we all know that the UK media will allow these people to say these things to millions of people unchallenged and uncritically. There really is need to be concerned. And we all need to remember that now is the time when the fascists will be the easiest to beat, because they aren't going away, they aren't giving up, and they're just getting stronger and more confident by the day now. They won't win, they never do. All fascist dictators face the rope or the bullet eventually, but last time it took 6 years and cost hundreds of millions of lives. Let's not have that episode over again, lest we forget. Anyway, links are forlornly inhabiting the description box below for PayPal, Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee. And as always, the join button for memberships is below. So obviously, that isn't all that I have to say, but it is as much of what I've got to say as I can bear to say about fascism today. Ta-ra. Nigel and Kemi don't want to acknowledge that though, and I haven't seen a single news report from any mainstream any mainstream nude media